Welcome to this deep dive. If you're listening to this right now, chances are you are a planner
Yeah,
and you are currently in the thick of preparing for a very crucial professional licensing exam.
which is incredibly stressful.
It is. So first of all, just take a breath. We see you. We know the pressure you're under right now. Studying for a professional exam of this caliber, it often feels like you're trying to drink from a fire hose.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got provincial legislation, local case studies, municipal zoning codes. It's exhausting to keep all those disparate regulations straight in your head.
It really is. And the temptation for most candidates is to immediately get lost in the deepest weeds of planning policy.
Right, like memorizing setback requirements or
Exactly, or the absolute minutia of variance approvals. But knowledge is really only valuable when it's understood and applied within a proper structural framework.
yeah.
If you don't understand the foundational boundaries of the professional landscape you're operating in, all those granular details are just going to slip right through your fingers.
Especially when you're faced with one of those complex, multi-layered scenario questions.
Precisely. Which is why today we're doing something a little different.
We are. We're going to put down the magnifying glass for a moment, zoom all the way out, and give you a clear, incredibly focused, strategic session that is going to make your study time highly effective.
A structural blueprint,
Right.
essentially.
And our mission today revolves around a very specific source document on your docket. It's an excerpt spanning pages 161 to 191, and it operates under a really intriguing title,
In search of the public interest.
In Search of the Public Interest.
Yeah.
Now, the source material we are looking at today is completely unique in your study stack.
Yeah, it stands out.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because across all 31 pages of this provided excerpt, we are not looking at dense paragraphs of policy text. We're not looking at historical case law.
Yeah.
We are looking at a single vital citation that is repeated over and over. It is the foundational metadata and the title framework of the text itself.
And, the sheer repetition of that framework is a massive signal for how you should approach your studies.
How so?
Well, before you can even begin to tackle the complex scenarios your exam will throw at you, you have to understand the literal framework of the documents that dictate your profession.
The actual container the ideas live in.
Exactly. The title of a book, its authors, the publisher, the origin date. These are the architectural blueprints of the ideas inside. They set the overarching legal and thematic boundaries that every single test question will eventually fall back on.
So let's pull that apart, because hidden inside this metadata is basically the entire conceptual universe of your profession.
It really is.
We'll start with the primary title of the overarching book. It's 4 simple words, but they represent the daily reality of your job.
Public interest. Private property.
Think about the friction you see in your day-to-day. You're looking at a Section 37 density bonusing application or perhaps a complex inclusionary zoning bylaw. The developer holds strict private property development rights, but the municipality needs to extract public benefits, affordable housing units, transit linkages, public art, to serve the public interest.
It's the ultimate tug of war.
It is, and the title of this book tells you that on the exam, you cannot play the activist.
No.
And you cannot play the developer's advocate.
You have to walk that tightrope perfectly. As a candidate taking this exam, you must remain strictly impartial.
That's a trap a lot of people fall into, isn't it?
Oh, constantly. But the title itself sets up this foundational friction without taking a side. It doesn't say the public interest is morally superior, nor does it imply private property rights are absolute and untouchable.
Right.
It presents them as the two balancing weights on the scale of your profession. The examiners aren't looking for ideology. They are testing your ability to manage that specific friction impartially using the tools of your profession.
That impartiality is the key to surviving the scenario questions. We are not endorsing a pro-collectivist view where the public always wins. And we're not taking a pro-individualist side where private property reigns supreme over the broader community needs. We're just looking at the reality of the tension.
Which makes your job incredibly difficult. Because on the exam, you won't be given a straightforward black and white scenario.
No, they're never that easy.
Never. You'll be given a modernized community conflict where both sides have legitimate legal standing. Public interest and private property are positioned in this title as equal opposing forces.
Yeah.
Every single policy recommendation you will ever draft and every complex scenario you'll evaluate on this test operates within the magnetic field generated by these two poles.
And that brings us to the specific title of the chapter excerpt. In Search of the Public Interest. I want to focus on the phrasing here. In search of.
It's very deliberate.
It implies a moving target. It tells you right away that the public interest isn't a fixed, easy-to-find statutory rule.
That phrase is a massive clue about the philosophy of the examiners. It acknowledges that the needs of a community shift drastically over time. Consider how the public interest was defined 50 years ago. Urban renewal projects that bulldozed entire neighborhoods to build arterial highways for commuter efficiency.
Yeah, that was considered peak public interest back then.
Exactly. Today, a planner evaluating that same space might determine the public interest requires tearing down that infrastructure to restore the ecological watershed or build a pedestrian greenway.
So when the exam presents a scenario involving, say, a heritage designation on a prime downtown development lot, the search means the candidate has to evaluate the current community context,
Yes.
not just rely on a static formula.
Exactly the approach you need. You will be tested on your ability to navigate ambiguity. You'll be asked to synthesize diverse, sometimes fiercely competing community needs against very strict established property rights.
It's not a math equation.
No. The search is your daily operational reality, and it's the core mechanism the exam uses to test your professional judgment.
Okay, so we have this overarching philosophical tension established. Public versus private, the ongoing search. But the secondary part of the title grounds it completely.
Law and planning policy in Canada.
Law and planning policy in Canada. Now, I want to push back a bit here for the sake of our listener. Realistically, when a planner is sweating through a 4-hour multiple-choice exam, why shouldn't they just rely on general international best practices for urban design?
It's a fair question.
Right, like why the intense focus on the Canadian context?
Because relying on generalized international theory is a trap that catches many candidates. The Canadian context is not just background flavor.
No.
No, it's the structural reality of your legal authority. Canadian planning law has its own highly unique constitutional framework and division of powers. If we look at how Canada balances public interest and private property, it is drastically different from the United States or the United Kingdom.
How does that actually manifest as an exam question, though? Let's ground that for the listener.
Let's consider the concept of property rights. In the United States, you have the Fifth Amendment, the Takings Clause, which heavily protects private property owners from government regulation that might devalue their land.
Right, often requiring immediate financial compensation if the government interferes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Canada does not have an equivalent constitutional protection for property rights. Under the Canadian Constitution Act, municipalities are creatures of the province.
Creatures of the province.
Yes. This means a Canadian planner has entirely different statutory tools and different legal limitations when imposing zoning restrictions or expropriating land for the public good.
So the baseline rules of engagement are fundamentally different.
Completely. If you apply American case law logic to a Canadian exam scenario, you will choose the wrong multiple-choice distractor every single time.
That is a critical distinction for the study notes right there. The examiner will absolutely craft distractors that sound like good progressive general planning theory.
But violate Canadian jurisdictional reality.
Exactly. And within that Canadian reality, the subtitle specifically separates law and planning policy.
Yes, it does.
Those are distinct concepts that candidates often conflate, right?
Conflating the two is the second major trap on this exam. The subtitle explicitly binds them together while keeping them distinct. Let's unpack the relationship in the context of your test.
Okay.
Law refers to the rigid enforceable statutes, like the Provincial Planning Acts. These are the binding rules enacted by legislatures. They represent the absolute statutory limits of what a municipality is legally permitted to do.
So the law dictates the absolute statutory limits, while the policy dictates the discretionary vision within those limits.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Planning policy is the strategic guiding vision. It's the official community plan, the secondary plans, the provincial policy statement.
It's the what we want to be document.
Exactly. It is how a community decides it wants to grow within the confines of the law. Policy is aspirational.
So how do they test that tension?
On the exam, you will likely encounter questions where a proposed development aligns beautifully with a visionary planning policy. Maybe it hits all the targets for high-density, mixed-use environmental sustainability.
Sounds like a winner.
But it violates a hard statutory limit of the prevailing law.
And as a professional, You cannot draft a visionary planning policy that violates the underlying legal statute, no matter how much it serves the public interest.
Exactly. And conversely, you cannot deeply understand the law without realizing it exists to facilitate planning policy.
Right.
The exam will test your ability to recognize which document takes precedence in a conflict. When you see law and policy in the source title, it's a reminder to always identify whether a scenario question is testing your knowledge of a strict legal boundary or a discretionary policy guideline.
Okay, so we're operating in this uniquely Canadian legal environment, balancing the strict boundaries of law with the aspirations of policy. But who is actually setting the parameters of this conversation? The citation specifically notes the text is edited by N.K. Smith and Marcia Valiente. It does not say authored by.
And that distinction between authored and edited is paramount when evaluating source material.
Because it changes the nature of the text.
Entirely. When a text like this is edited by Smith and Valiante, it means they are functioning as curators. They are the architects of a much broader academic and legal conversation, bringing together multiple, likely dissenting expert voices on this incredibly complex topic of public versus private rights.
By curating these essays or chapters, they're signaling that there isn't just one monolithic, authoritative voice on how to resolve these disputes.
Exactly. Which tells you, the exam candidate, that you need to be prepared to weigh different expert opinions and synthesize them.
Because that's the real job.
It is. In administrative tribunals like the Ontario Land Tribunal or equivalent provincial bodies, you will rarely find a scenario where all the experts agree. You'll have a transportation planner arguing one priority, an environmental planner arguing another, and a heritage consultant arguing a third. The editors have modeled the exact synthesis you are required to perform on the exam.
Let's look at the timeline of that curation. The citation gives us the exact publication details. UBC Press, 2015.
A very specific anchor point.
Yeah, I get why the institutional backing matters. UBC Press implies high-level, rigorously peer-reviewed academic standards.
Really?
But if I'm a planner studying for an exam right now, do I really care about the publication year being 2015? The field of planning moves incredibly fast.
You should care deeply, because 2015 gives you a chronological peg to hang your analytical framework on. It's like carbon dating your policy knowledge.
Okay, I like that. Carbon dating.
Think about the timeline of urban development in Canada. 2015 represents a specific crystallized era of academic and legal thought. It was published before the massive global shifts brought on by the events of 2020.
Right, which completely altered our understanding of commercial real estate, remote work, and public space utilization.
Exactly.
It also predates the massive, sweeping legislative overhauls we've seen recently regarding the housing affordability crisis.
Yes.
Like the mandates for blanket upzoning or the removal of single-family exclusionary zoning in major municipalities.
And that is exactly the context you need. When you are analyzing a precedent or relying on a framework from a specific text, you have to know where it sits on the timeline of planning history.
So if an exam question presents a scenario based on a 2015 paradigm,
your solution must account for the legislative and societal shifts that have occurred since. You cannot apply a 2015 solution to a modernized housing crisis scenario without adjusting for current provincial mandates.
you have to bridge that gap yourself.
You do.
Now, I want to dive into the most specific and frankly unusual part of this source document. We have an incredible digital footprint left on the page.
The metadata.
Yeah. The document exists on ProQuest eBook Central. It has a specific document ID of 4397148, and it includes an exact download timestamp. Created from Alberta on 2022-12-08-15.53.47.
Highly specific.
It's a literal digital receipt from the University of Alberta in late 2022. But what does a timestamped digital receipt actually tell a planner about how they should evaluate this source on a test?
It might seem like administrative digital exhaust, but it points to the core of modern planning practice.
Which is?
Evidence-based decision-making and the chain of custody for information. As a planner, your recommendations will affect thousands of people and millions of dollars in property value.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. Your decisions will be appealed, they will be scrutinized by city councils, by angry ratepayer associations, and by administrative law tribunals.
So when you're standing in front of a tribunal defending your recommendation to deny a variance, you can't just say, I feel this is in the public interest.
You have to prove it. The ProQuest ID, the institution of origin, the timestamp, this metadata represents the modern planner's architecture of verifiability.
It's the paper trail.
It is. It proves that the framework you're using isn't just a subjective opinion you pulled out of thin air. It is grounded in accessible, verifiable academic research from a recognized institution. Your exam will test your ability to base your decision on defensible evidence.
So the metadata is essentially the evidence of the evidence.
Exactly.
It tells the examiner, I know how to source, archive, and apply legally defensible precedents.
And it shows an understanding of the rigorous administrative standards required in the profession.
First, we explored the ultimate overarching tension of the profession, the foundational friction between public interest and private property. We established that on the exam, your job isn't to play the activist and pick a winner.
Right.
Your job is to manage that friction impartially, synthesizing diverse community needs against strict development rights.
Second, we looked at the subtitle to understand the distinct but deeply connected roles of rigid statutory law and visionary planning policy.
And the jurisdiction.
Exactly. We emphasized that this must be evaluated within the unique historical and constitutional context of Canada, where municipalities are creatures of the province.
Meaning American property rights logic will lead you to the wrong answer every time.
Then third, we acknowledged the curators of this knowledge, editors Smith and Valiante. They demonstrate the necessity of synthesizing multiple, often dissenting expert perspectives.
Which is a skill you will absolutely need for scenario questions involving administrative tribunals. Right. And we also anchored this framework chronologically to 2015, reminding you to adjust your analysis for the massive legislative and societal shifts regarding housing and urban space that have occurred since that era.
And finally, we looked at the digital footprint, the ProQuest ID and the University of Alberta timestamp from late 2022. This serves as a vital reminder that modern planning requires rigorous, verifiable information architecture.
Chain of custody.
Yes, your decisions on the exam and in the field must be backed by a defensible chain of custody.
Before we wrap up, do you have any final strategic advice as they get back to the books?
I do. As you continue your exam prep, I want to offer some reassurance. It is incredibly easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of municipal codes and provincial statutes you're trying to memorize right now.
It's a mountain of reading.
It is.
Yeah.
But remember that mastering the overarching framework we discussed today is your skeleton key. When you are faced with a dense, hyper-detailed 4-paragraph scenario question that seems impossible to untangle, fall back on this metadata framework.
Ground yourself in the basics.
Exactly. Ask yourself, where is the core tension between public and private in this specific scenario? Is the question trying to trick me by conflating a strict legal boundary with a discretionary policy aspiration?
Or applying American property rights to a Canadian city.
Right. How does the Canadian constitutional context eliminate certain multiple choice options? If you understand the structural architecture of the discipline, you can navigate any granular detail the examiners throw at you.
You absolutely have the tools to conquer this. Just keep zooming out to the structural framework when you get stuck in the legislative weeds.
You've got this.
And to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over while you review your notes, we discussed how this document was digitally archived at a very specific moment in time, December 8th, 2022.
That specific snapshot.
Yeah. It represents a snapshot of the search for the public interest at that exact second. So, given everything that has disrupted our cities, our housing markets, and our legislative landscape since late 2022, how might the legal and societal definition of the public interest have fundamentally shifted in just the few years since that download?
That's a great question.
And ultimately, as a planner tasked with balancing these ever-evolving forces, will your profession ever truly finish that search?
Probably not.
Keep that in mind, trust your preparation, and we will see you on the other side of the exam.